Amanda from Pontes Books here with our first video for chapter 8 of The Prince and the Pauper, our vocabulary focus. So our vocab word to focus on for today is seal. So this is a word that has many different types of meanings, some of which are absolutely used often in The Prince and the Pauper and some that are never used at all. So like the animal is seal, you're not going to see that come up in The Prince and the Pauper at all. So we're not talking about that one. Instead, we are talking about, for the most part, a material with a design stamped into it to approve documents. This is the one that we see the most in The Prince and the Pauper, although there is another definition we'll talk about later as well. So some facts or characteristics: it acts like a sort of signature. So as it says, it's to approve documents. So it is what showed approval from the king, for example. That's how it's used in the story, the Great Seal. So some examples could be like a symbol or a crest or an insignia that represent somebody that gets stamped into these documents. And there's not really a whole lot of non-examples, but basically things showing disapproval is not what a seal typically does, unless that's what the document says and you are giving your approval that you disapprove of whatever the law is or whatever. So looking at the etymology of this word, it kind of traces back to two main languages that it has in here, and I'm not sure one may have come first still, but I wanted to list them both. So one is Latin, sigillium, always not sure on my Latin pronunciations, meaning small picture, engraved figure, or seal. And then another language of origin is Old French. So seal, I would assume, would be how you pronounce that, meaning like a seal on a letter. So looking at some example sentences using this word. So just our straightforward sentence: the king used his royal seal to show he approved the document. Straightforward, simply put. Our next symbol also involves a king, but is from The Prince and the Pauper and is therefore a little more complex. The king dropped into inarticulate mumblings, gropingly trying to recollect what he had done with the seal. So this word seal gets used a ton in chapter 8 because that's what this chapter is all about, is the Great Seal goes missing. So that's the king's seal that he uses. And so like I said, it gets used a ton. That's just one sentence example from the chapter. So other forms of this word that also get used in the book, to seal or have something be sealed, to fasten close or securely, gets used a lot in the story as well. So both of those you'll see throughout the story, but probably the one that you see the most is capitalized. And when it's capitalized, it's talking about the king's seal. So since this was something that's meant to show signature or show approval, kind of like signatures, I wanted to look into when did we switch to signatures. And there actually was a time where both were being used. Seals and signatures were being used. So the 16th and 17th centuries in Europe, signatures, that's when they kind of started widely being used, but they were actually around for quite a while before then. But even around the time of when they started becoming popular, seals were still in use as well. So the reason for them kind of being on the rise, though, was that education and literacy rates were going up. So if people could read, they could theoretically read a signature, although if you look at modern day signatures, a lot of times they're not really legible anyway. But also most agreements at this time were starting to be made in writing. And in fact, in 1677, there was something called the Statute of Frauds that was put in place in England that said contracts must exist in writing and contain a signature. So obviously at that time, then all of those documents would have started using signatures for sure if they hadn't already. And then this tradition kind of also carried over into colonial America, which is still pretty commonly used. I would say you still are signing most things to give your approval. So what were some other ways to show approval? I guess I didn't format this right, blocking a word there. What were some other ways to show approval? You could press a signet ring into beeswax. So it's kind of like a seal, but you have it right on your hand. Also signet rings in general. So actually, fun fact, if you've ever seen the Prince and the Pauper Disney version with Mickey Mouse, instead of having this great seal that's like something that you hold on to, it is actually a ring, and that's what Mickey like Royal Mickey uses to prove that he really is the prince slash king at the end. Also, another strange one I saw is cutting off a lock of hair could show your approval that you are agreeing to something. Slapping or other traumatic acts. Interesting, why not? And then one that I think was more common, especially to people who didn't necessarily know how to write, but were supposed to give like a signature, is just signing an X. So that's something, if you look back into kind of like your family history, sometimes if they have documents and your ancestors didn't know how to write, you might just see an X there. So fun facts about seals and other ways that we show approval. Hopefully you learned something. Have a good rest of your day.